This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Use the links in the description to visit their store. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and it's Saturday. That means it's time for Nitsa Notes, my weekly vlog series about limited magic. We're still talking Final Fantasy Limited, and now it's time, we've got enough data over on 17 Lands. It's a website I really recommend if you want to get better at limited. You can go to 17lands.com. You can have them track your data on Magic Arena. You can also, even if you don't have them track your data, you can go to look at all the data they have on their site. And data is not the end-all be-all when it comes to limited, but it does give us a lot of information that we can't get in our own, let's say 50 drafts we do in a format. You can get some idea of things, to be sure, but you don't have the massive sample size, especially early on in a format like right now. So, that's what we're going to be looking at today. The cards that I got wrong in my set review, based on what the data is saying right now and why I got them wrong. It's always an interesting look back at the set review. It's an interesting way to look at card evaluation, but also it gives us kind of an interesting look at the format. I will say, for I think the second set in a row, I did really well when it comes to like the extremes. That is, like, what are the really big bombs? What are really bad? Got most of those right. If you watch my top 10 bombs video and the like. What are the best commons and uncommons? Got most of those right. There's one color where there's an exception, as we'll see. But I did pretty well on the whole in this particular set. But the set still has 300, especially this one, has 300 some odd cards. So, I didn't get them all right. That's impossible. And there are some pretty egregious misses that we'll look at. So let's go ahead and dive right in with a look at some cards that I got wrong in my set review. All right, so let's just go ahead and kick off with one of the biggest misses in the set for me, which is, I think, is Sahagin. So gave this a D+. It has a win rate of 58.3%. That's like a C+, arguably a B-, which is a pretty big miss for a common especially, right? So it wasn't anywhere near my best blue commons list. I didn't think it was going to be very good at all. My thinking here was that I felt like the mana 4 or greater payoffs they need to be something that felt good even if you only triggered them once. And I thought that wouldn't be the case here. But there's a few things happening that make Sahagin extra good. First, all the 1/3s and like 1/4s. There's the 2 mana 1/4 robot too, which I liked more and is a little better than I expected, but isn't a huge miss like this. Those are all better than they have been in, like, I don't know, any set in recent memory. That's because there's a ton of X1s and 2/2s in this set that they can block forever. Basically, you play Sahagin on 2 and they play Black Mage's Rod. You know what I mean? Like, that's not a good situation for them. And there's a lot of creatures like that. And you do, like, this format, you can do lots of, like, late game shenanigans, of course. We talked about that some last week. But you do need to get on board early still. And Sahagin is, like, one of the best ways for those slower decks to get on board early, because it gives them this body that you can grow. And once it's a 2/4, like, there's also a big cap at like 3/3 in this set. There aren't that many 4-power creatures that can even attack through a 2/4. And once it's that big, like, it's even harder for your opponent to do anything. And then it kind of turns into a win condition for you late because it can get in for damage. So, I thought it would be relatively easy to grow, but I just thought the baseline was bad enough. And like 2 mana 1/3 in most sets is bad enough. But I think 2 mana 1/3 vanilla in this set would be like a D+ at worst. Like, that's how good that stat line is in this set for the blue decks especially. So it's just a really good stat line in this very specific set, and that makes Sahagin better. Plus, growing it is, perhaps a little bit easier than I expected, and makes it far more formidable than I expected. Even just growing it once makes it a pretty big problem for a lot of decks in the format. All right, now let's look at a card that I overrated, and it's kind of a whole category of cards in this set, and that is Tifa's Limit Break. So I gave this a C+. That's a decent combat trick. 1 green mana for +2/+2 isn't great, and I wouldn't guess that card alone would be good, but I thought the additional upside would make this a quality combat trick that you want in like all of your green decks that are attacking regularly. But combat tricks in this format on the whole are underperforming hardcore. Like, we don't see that a lot either. In fact, most of the time the problem is the combat tricks are too good, right? But other than like restoration magic, which is the 1 mana white one that you can, has the different tiers and everything, pretty much all the combat tricks are bad. Bad's an exaggeration. Like Tifa's Limit Break is a D. It's not unplayable. Sometimes you end up in the right green deck. You have a lot of trample. You can really go, summon Fat Chocobo can make this thing do some work sometimes, for example. So sometimes you play it, but it's not the kind of card you want at all in all of your green decks, and it's not the kind of card that you take highly at all. And that's just because there's so much interaction. There are lots of really cheap spells. Every color can interact for 2 mana or less and kill most stuff, depending on the board state. So you find yourself in spots a lot more often where your opponent has mana up in this format. And that inherently is going to make a combat trick worse too, because ideally you want them to be good when your opponent doesn't have that much mana. That's why they're much better usually, and they still are in this set. They're better when you're the aggressor, because your opponent's less likely to have mana up on your turn than they are on their turn. Like when they have all their mana up and they attack you and you use a trick defensively, that's a recipe for disaster. It's like an emergency break glass kind of thing, right? But they feel kind of like that when you're the attacker too in this format, unfortunately. Haste Magic is bad. That's another card I got wrong because I thought its 2/1 potential would be really good, but it's like a straight up F. The Blitz Ball trick isn't great. It's a little bit better than Tifa's Limit Break, I think, because of Trample. I mentioned Restoration Magic, but You're Not Alone is also decent. It's also not as good as you'd expect a trick with that high of a ceiling to be, but it's fine. So, white does have 2 pretty good ones, plus they also have Zac Fair, so it can be pretty difficult interacting against white because of things like that. But for the most part, tricks underwhelm in this format, which is interesting. I don't remember really the last time where 1 mana and 2 mana tricks were this bad. One thing I should have mentioned at the beginning, by the way, about these win rates is that the overall win rate on 17 lands is 54.7%, much higher than the Magic community as a whole. So win a card, even when it has a positive quote unquote win rate, it really doesn't if it's below 54.7%. So that's something to keep in mind. All right, I mentioned the Blitz Ball trick. Let's look now at actual Blitz Ball. So this is an interesting one to look at, I think. I thought it would be interesting in the set review too. Normally I would have given this card a D, probably. But because we just had Dragonstorm Globe, I was like, maybe this is another set where you can do this. Maybe this is another set where you can have the 3 mana rock that taps for mana of any color be decent. I still didn't think it was going to be good as the Globe. I gave it a C-, meaning you don't play it all the time, certainly. You don't take it highly, but you do play it. But I don't think that's the case in the end. The win rate here is 51%. I just think it's an F. So one of the big differences, I think, between the two formats is this is one where it is more imperative that you get on board when you're doing things. You generally, cards that don't do anything else other than, straight up draw you cards with no other effect, ramp your mana with no other effect. Those kinds of cards are liabilities in this set, like they usually are. That wasn't the case in Turkey or Dragonstorm. So, I thought maybe they had figured out a way to make these 3 mana rocks viable in like every set, and that this one might work out because it does have this effect that you do trigger. Like I've seen people trigger it. I triggered it early in the format when I was playing this thing. You do draw cards with it sometimes, and that's nice. But overall, this just isn't a card you should really play. It doesn't help either. Sometimes you do want to ramp because you have one of the 8 mana bombs in the set, which there are a couple of. The big Knight Saga, and then the Usurper guy who makes your creatures and graveyards into demons. There are just way better ways to ramp in the set that do actually add to the board. Like even Prish's Awakening is a lot better than Blitzball just because you get a counter. And sometimes you can use that as a trick. It triggers landfall, which also matters. Blitzball doesn't do it. So it just isn't in a good spot in this set at all, which is typical. It's maybe even worse than the, Manalith card is in most sets, because it is, I think, just a straight up F. But it isn't Dragonstorm Globe, that's for sure. All right, next let's look at Summon Anima. So I gave this a B, which is like, you first pick this frequently. You always play a couple copies of it, generally speaking, is what that means. Not so much. It has a win rate of 53.4%, and that's like a C minus, I would say. So I had some reservations about it in the set review. I didn't love the stat line, especially 6 mana, 4/4 menace is really bad. Like that's just not a stat line you like. But I also was just looking at it and thinking this is going to draw me 3 cards, and then it's going to take something away from my opponent, and I have an okay 4/4 menace body around for a while. So, and all of that's true. Like, this can be a massive card advantage engine, but it turns out that the woeful inefficiency really is a problem. Like, it really holds this card back because a lot of I've literally never seen chapter 4 of this go off. That's one indicator of how this card has been going. I mean, I'm sure it happens. I'm not saying it never does, but I'm like 25 drafts in. I've seen, I don't know, 15, 20 Summon Animas, and I've never seen chapter 4. And that's because typically, like, sure, you add this body to the board, but a lot of the time, if you don't already have a good board, playing this is a huge liability because your opponent's just like, okay, you played a 4/4. Meanwhile, my 4-drop and 5-drop and maybe even my 3-drop can all just attack into it. What are you going to do? And so you end up a lot of the time trading it off, and you technically got a 2-for-1, but the mana inefficiency is so bad because your opponent makes you trade this off. You take some damage, then they slam another creature on the table, and suddenly doesn't really matter that much that you drew an extra card. And sometimes it can kill people too. The fact this makes you lose life does hurt it in a big way, just because playing this when it's this inefficient and also losing a life, like, really can set you up for failure. If your board's in a good spot, casting Summon Anima can definitely win you the game, but you were already in a good spot, right? So that's what makes a card like Summon Anima a lot less good. And that's one thing, there are a few cards in this set. We're going to talk about 1 or 2 more in this video where the card has an inefficient stat line, but it seemingly looks like it should be okay. But it's because it has enough other effects, but it's just not. And that's something we've continued to see in limited format after limited format after limited format. Bad stat lines really need help to be really good cards in limited these days, because a 6-drop that dies to 2 mana removal, a 6-drop that your opponent can still alpha strike into, is just miserable. Like, that kind of thing is just really, really bad. All right, let's go ahead and just next look at another creature that is inefficient and that I didn't love in the set review, but is even worse. And that is Laporet Scout. So win rate 49% here. I give it a C minus, and it was because of that stat line that I held back on going higher. I didn't love the fact that it's a 3/2, basically. Dying to 1 mana removal in its case is really bad. 1-drops, 2-drops, 3-drops can all trade with it. That's just really bad. But I did think, there's enough ways to go a little wide here that it'll be attacking as like a 5/4 often enough to make up for that. But it just doesn't. It's super inefficient. You end up having to trade it off for something that costs less a lot of time in the early game. And like, green-white does have a go wide theme, but it's not that well established. Most of the best ways to go wide in green-white are higher on the curve, like Summon Fat Chocobo or Renoa Heartilly. Like, there aren't that many cards in green-white that actually make multiple bodies, even though that's sort of the theme. And then by the time you play your 5-drop and grow this to a 5/4, it's not that important anymore. Sometimes it has trample because of the Summon Fat Chocobo, I guess. Although that's on a subsequent turn, so it probably won't be a 5/4 anymore. But yeah, it's another card where you look at it, and there was a time in limited where you could look at a card like this, a 3-mana 3/2 with upside, and be like, yeah, I mean, it's not amazing, but it's a C minus. And I mean, there was even a time in limited where this would look amazing, for that matter, if you go back far enough. But it's just not. It's too inefficient. Bad stat lines are tough to overcome. And sometimes, like with Sahagin, which seemingly has a stat line that hasn't been impressive in a while, sometimes stat lines are better in a specific format. Sometimes they're worse. When you have a set that has multiple 1-mana ways to do 2 damage or give -2/-2, for example, it makes a 3-mana 3/2 a lot worse. So Yeah, Laporte Scout, pretty bad. I don't recommend playing it. Even in an emergency, might just be better to have a land in your deck, honestly, especially if you have landfall. All right, next, let's take a look at combat tutorial. So I did like this a reasonable amount in the set review. I said specifically, adding a +1/+1 counter to combat to divination is a big deal. The fact of the matter is, like, that lets you add to the board. It's not quite as good as 3 mana 1/1 draw 2 cards, right? It's not quite that good, but it's not that far off. And 3 mana 1/1 draw 2 cards is an amazing limited card. Like that, sure, the stat line's bad there, right? But you're drawing 2 right away, and then it can chump block something, and it's pretty cheap. So you're getting a pretty good card there. And this isn't quite that good, I don't think. I mean, there's some argument. Sometimes it's even better, I guess, because you have something better to put the counter on. Like, if your board's empty, the 1/1's better, but otherwise, the counter might be better. And, like, turn 2 Sahagin, turn 3 combat tutorial is surprisingly hard to attack through if you're trying to be the beatdown in this format. And those are 2 of the best blue commons. It didn't make my top 3 blue commons list. I did at least think combat tutorial was in the mix. A C+ indicates I thought it was a blue common you're going to value relatively highly. You're going to be happy to have it in your deck. But it's more like a B-, and I could even hear an argument that it's a B. The only thing is you still don't want, like, it's hard to play like 4 of them just because you do need creatures to put the counters on. But like the first 2 are definitely really good. And it's one thing that's really impressive about it, I think, is it doesn't get the bump that some cards get just for having a mode where they cost 4 or more mana. Some cards are even better because of that. This can't do that, and it's still really good. If it had like flashback for like 9 mana even, it would be even better. But it's a great common, one of the best commons in the set. It and Dragoon's Wyvern are sort of neck and neck for best blue common, which I did get that right for Dragoon's Wyvern, at least. That one was easy, though. Combat tutorial was a little harder for me to predict a divination would be that good, but it's really, really good. You add to the board and draw 2 cards, and that is hard to be upset with. So next, let's look at Saj's Chocobo. So I was correct that Saj would be one of the biggest bombs in the format, despite many people in the comments thinking I was crazy. However, I did get his Chocobo wrong. I did say in this review, if you play this on turn 1, your opponent doesn't kill it, they're going to lose. Like, that was on the table. Obviously, that's the case for a 1 mana 0/1 with landfall, +1/+1 counter. But it turns out it's even better when you get it late, and that has led to it having a win rate of 60%, the highest win rate of any card we're going to look at here. So it's like a B+. It's like a first pickable green card that you take highly, very highly. And there are a few reasons for this. One of them is just that it's easier to continue to grow your creatures in the mid to late game than I expected. There are enough cards that give you multiple land drops or search up lands. So even if you play this thing on like turn 4, which I thought would feel pretty bad, like it's probably going to be a 0/1 that you put 1 counter on and then trade it off or something. But it turns out triggering landfall is even easier than I expected. I mean, it doesn't hurt that blue, green, and red, green both have a signpost uncommon that let you trigger it twice in a turn, generally speaking. Ignis Scientia grabs the land, and so does Gladiolus Amicitia. And those cards go a long way towards making sure that the Chocobo continues to grow. And it still has that upside of, if you play this on turn 1, like, it's hard to believe, but this has a higher win rate than Ragavan. Ragavan has a much lower number of games played because it's on the bonus sheet, but Ragavan's kind of the same in my mind, where if you play it on turn 1, you probably win, and if your opponent doesn't kill it. But the Chocobo has a higher win rate right now. So that's kind of interesting, I think. But yeah, it's a great card. Much better than I expected it to be. One of the best uncommons in the set. I do think Summon Fenrir is even better, and that's what I picked as green's best uncommon. So green is ridiculously deep, as I said last week. But yeah, Saj's Chocobo is great. All right, so let's take a look now at Summon GF Ifrit. I gave this a C+. I thought this looked like kind of a quality 3-drop. I thought 3 mana, 3/2. Like, the way I evaluated a lot of these summons, and it worked out for most of them. Like, I think I got most of them right, but obviously not Summon Anima or Summon GF Ifrit. And the way I looked at them is, am I okay with a card that just has chapter one like as an interest trigger? And I thought 3 mana 3/2 discard a card, draw a card would be okay. Like I didn't think it was going to be great, but then this also can do it again, and then it gives you some mana, and it does go away eventually. But it kind of has the same problem as Laporte Scout, and part of that is the stat line, which is real bad. It just doesn't stand up to a whole lot of things very effectively, and early in the format when I was playing this a lot, because I thought it was going to be a really good red common. Luckily, it didn't make my best commons list, but for me, it was probably number 4 or 5 at the end of the set review. That's how good I thought it would be. It's not. The stat line is the same as Laporte Scout, right? And maybe it has more upside. I mean, obviously, it has a higher win rate. But yeah, it's just not very good, and it doesn't help that it doesn't really support any red archetype in any way, shape, or form. Like if it did something with landfall, or it did something with spells, or something, anything like that, it would be a lot better than it is. As it is, it's not. It doesn't do anything special for any deck, so it's basically just what it is. 3 mana, 3/2 with some mediocre triggers that you can't, none of them are things you can always take advantage of. That also has an expiration date, which doesn't really matter because your opponent will probably be running you over before it ever dies. But yeah, Summon GF Ifrit, it's like a D-. Like you can play it if you've really got to. And maybe if you end up in a deck with a lot of graveyard stuff, it gets a little bit better. And red has a little bit of that going on, but not really enough. Right now, let's look at another blue common that I got wrong, Dreams of Laguna. So that's 3 blue commons that are on this list. Just at the beginning, I said I did pretty well in the best commons and uncommons, except for one color, and that's what I meant. Because I was basically not completely wrong, because Dragoon's Wyvern is number 1, but I think Combat Tutorial is number 2 and Sahagin is number 3, and those two weren't even on my list. Like I said, the tutorial kind of on the radar, but didn't make it for me. So this card is sort of the opposite of Summon GF Ifrit, right? It lines up with a bunch of what blue is trying to do. So it does graveyard stuff, which obviously the blue-black deck likes because of Surveil. It's a spell, which blue-red likes, and especially because it has flashback, which will trigger the blue-red payoffs. So it does both of those things. In addition to just being like a 2-mana instant with this effect is pretty solid. And I thought of it, in the set review, I said it's sort of like Think Twice. The flashback's more expensive, but you get to Surveil. I made that comparison, and I thought that it would be okay. In the end, I gave it a C- as a grade. But in reality, like, it's a C+ and maybe even a B-, and that's an interesting thing about this format, right? You can spend these 2 mana to not add to the board, but it does increase your card quality enough. It sets up synergy because you've got a bunch of flashback, so you can surveil something into the yard. You can find what you need. Like, looking 2 cards deep is a big deal, and I think I underrated that a little bit. Like, sometimes I think when I see Surveil, I think more of the graveyard part than I do of just like the value of surveilling in the first place, which is really good. Like if this was Scry 1 draw a card for 2, I might have graded it higher, which is I think a flaw, because Surveil is in most ways strictly better. So that's kind of a problem on my part for how I look at Surveil. Like I think graveyard synergy, great, but it's just a good effect because you get to look potentially 2 cards deep into your deck, which is a huge percentage in limited, and you get to do it again later for not that much mana. And so this ends up digging you really deep in your deck for only 1 card, and that's a really good thing. Like this format does have lots of powerful plays, especially, you have uncommons, rares, and mythics that can just shift the game wildly in your favor, and finding those faster is a big deal. And this helps you do it at an efficient rate while also hitting some synergy points for multiple decks in blue. All right, and the last card I want to look at is Sorceress's Schemes. So I did not like this at all in the set review. I gave it a D. My thinking there was that it makes you spend a bunch of mana at sorcery speed and it doesn't add to the board. And that's true. I do think this card's more of a build around than basically everything else we've seen. Like you can't just throw this in like every red deck and have it work very well, because obviously if you're in like red-white, you don't really want this. But if you're in blue-red, especially, and black-red to a lesser extent, Sorceress's Schemes is pretty good. And part of it is because it is one of only a few cards in the set that can trigger your mana 4 or greater payoffs twice. Most of them can do it once because they have a high mana value and you just cast them and they trigger it, or they are cheaper spells with a more expensive flashback that will trigger it, or they're a tiered spell, right, that can only do it once when you cast it for more mana. But Sorceress's Schemes can trigger it twice, and if you have a few of those in play, and like even just Sahagin and friends are around, Ultros and Sahagin are in play, casting this and getting both of those effects, a counter and stunning a creature, makes up for the fact that it doesn't add to the board, because it does, right? Like it's making an impact on the board now. And that's why I say it's a bit of a build around. Like you can't just throw this into your deck. You need to have ways to take advantage of triggering this. And there are some times, especially in the late game, where you can cast this, you get a mana back, lets you flashback it as well, maybe, and so you can trigger things multiple times. And obviously just recurring some of the powerful spells in the format that can also trigger your 4 mana or more payoffs, like just Thunder Magic or Ice Magic, getting those back also starts to snowball in a big way on your opponent. So it's like a build around B-. That's how it's played out. That's how good it is. It is a win rate of 58.8%. So, I didn't even give it like build around potential. I just thought it would be too dirtily and too slow. But as we can see with the fact that Sahagin is on this list, I think in general, I underrated the 4 or greater mana payoffs. Like I could have Ultros on this list too. I think I gave him a C, and he's like C plus B minus, not a huge miss, but that card's better than I expected too. So yeah, the blue-red deck is really good, and it can get away with playing a card like Sorceress's Schemes, and not just get away with it, it can thrive casting a card like Sorceress's Schemes. All right, so those are the cards I wanted to look at to give you a little look into the format, how I'm thinking things have changed, what my set review looked like, and all of that. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it. If you want to catch future videos about the format, like next week, where I'll start taking a look at overrated and underrated cards, you should subscribe. And if you want to catch up on my other content about this format, including the set review, my archetype guide for the format, draft videos, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.